For years, Paralympic media coverage has paled in comparison to media coverage compared to that of any other sport. From the 1996 Paralympic coverage to the Auburn University wheelchair basketball team, very little has changed in how mainstream media views the sporting industry.
A lot of the stories that are told about our student athletes or anyone that participates in an adapted sports or Paralympic team, it's always about how they've overcome something or what kind of inspiration they are. And while that's true, those stories are there. Our student athletes want to be seen as just athletes, as student athletes, nothing more than that. They do have different stories in terms of how they get injured, whether it was an accident or whether it was by birth. But their hope and our hope is that people look at them as true athletes and see them for who they are, and then maybe a subtext of how they got injured or what they overcame, but ultimately just look at it as a sport, because that's really what basketball is. Wheelchair basketball is no different than the running game that we see. It's just played a little different.
These athletes are more than just their disabilities, but it's imperative that journalists do not fall into the cliche of highlighting these athletes as nothing more than supercrips. By describing athletes in this light, media coverage is limited. They fail to realize that adaptive sports like basketball are just like any other basketball game, and these athletes are like any other athletes.
We're athletes. We're just like any other athlete. We put in the work day in and day out. 6 a.m. practice and then lift after that, conditioning, film, all that type of stuff. I think it's just getting people to come out and see what we do every day and getting to realize that we're just like any other athlete.
When I explain it, I'm just like, if you like regular basketball, you'll love wheelchair basketball because there's always something going. Somebody's beating and banging, somebody's flipping over, like you're in tune with the game the whole entire time.
But in order for people to realize this, it begins with media.
So I think when reporters are doing the research on adapted sports or Paralympic sports, it's easy to have that feel-good story of, hey, this person had an accident, but now look at what they're doing. But part of that's also because adapted sports and Paralympic sports, it's not in the mainstream yet. I know there's been a lot more coverage with the Paralympic Games last year or 2 years ago in Pyeongchang, and then even 3 years ago when we were in Rio, there was more coverage, and there's starting to be more and more coverage of it. But until it is seen more as a sport and less of a feel-good story, I think that's where people are going to start continuing to look at it as a feel-good story. Hey, look what they can do. They're such an inspiration to us. When instead it should be, look at the way that they play basketball. Look at how physical this game is. And oh, by the way, Auburn won.